Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this evening's event. Welcome to all of those who are joining us here at the University of Warwick in person, and also to all from the Royal Economic Society joining us remotely. It's great to have so many people with us today for what's a hugely important event. We will be focusing on the climate crisis. It's something I'm sure we've all been aware of this for many, many years, but of course it was particularly thrown into sharp relief by COP26, sorry, not COP22, although COP22 was important. But also I think the current war in Ukraine really foregrounds some of the challenges that we face around the way in which we manage and source energy. But COP26 has also reminded us of the importance of collaboration. And that's collaboration whether it's across sectors, across countries, across individuals, teams, across disciplines. And it's the reminder that governments, companies, universities, organisations all need to be able to collaborate for lots of reasons. One, the most obvious one, is that the kind of challenges we're facing are so massive, so all-encompassing, that we can't hope to deal with them ourselves. We do need to work together, but also because we need to recall the interdependencies, the externalities that go with this agenda. And if we can't take a collaborative and broad-based approach, there is much that we will miss. And collaboration is our focus this evening. Here at Warwick, like many other institutions around the country, we recognised our responsibilities. We declared our climate emergency. We set our targets. We framed our response using the SDGs so that we could highlight the importance of people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership, bringing us back to the idea of collaboration. We focused on environmental, economic and social sustainability, on education, research and our sustainable campus. Our emphasis has been very much around mitigation and adaptation. We've worked on technical issues, but also on the behavioural and the cultural. And a particular theme that's perhaps relevant today is the extensive programme of work on behavioural issues and the role of nudges in guiding policymakers. And I think as a university that has a long tradition of working with business and industry, we recognise the importance of adaptations and mitigations that have an impact, but also ones that make economic and commercial sense. And we work with organisations as diverse as SMEs, working on last mile transport, to the likes of JLR, British Volt and UK Battery Innovation Centre. So diversity of collaborations in there. What we're mindful of is that we are on the way to sustainability. We're travelling a journey. We needed to be guided by the insight that we get from research, our own research, from that of colleagues. We need to look for solutions in between. We need to look between disciplines, and we need to look at viable solutions. We need to look at the technical and the behavioural, and we need to embrace people and communities as we travel that journey towards sustainability. And most importantly, we need to be willing and able to work collaboratively. And collaboration, as I said, is the theme of tonight's discussion. So it gives me great pleasure to hand over the evening's events to Dani, who is going to chair this evening's discussion. Dani, over to you.
Thank you very much for opening our discussion tonight, and good evening to all of you. Thank you very much for joining our panel discussion. It's Solving the Climate Crisis Together. That is the important word. Welcome also to the Royal Economic Society Conference delegates watching us virtually, so I'm talking to you through here. Now, the war in Ukraine, as Chris quite rightly said, has of course been dominating the world of news, which is the world that I normally work in. But the climate crisis has definitely not gone away. Now, tonight, as Chris said there, was partly inspired by COP26 And tonight what we're aiming to do is explore that notion of collaboration, that idea of working together, singing from the same hymn sheet effectively, in order to achieve net zero goals. COP26 stated that governments, businesses, civil society, they need to work together to transform the ways we power our homes, our businesses, grow our food, develop infrastructure and move ourselves and goods around. So with that in mind, we've invited a group of experts from different fields all to sit together to consider if collaborative work is indeed the way forward in order to solve the climate crisis. Is it feasible? And if so, can it be achieved? Now, the format of the event is pretty straightforward. This is how it's going to work. I'm going to start off by introducing each one of our expert guests and ask them to really outline their position on how they might solve the climate emergency and if they've got any recommendations on how this could be done collaboratively, so together. Now, the idea is to start a discussion to see if there's any common ground. There may well be, or indeed, there may well be positions that are polarised, but we welcome all of those views. And we'd also encourage you all to get involved in this conversation. There will be some time set aside for you to direct your questions to each of the panellists at the end, so do raise your hand, and one of our students who is milling around here will get a microphone to you and we will hear your question. And of course, those of you who are watching online, you can post your questions to the panellists in the conference platform, the Q&A feature, rather than the chat feature. And we have got Professor Caroline Elliott, hello to you, sitting on the front row. She's from Warwick Economics, sitting in the audience there, monitoring all those questions diligently. Thank you very much. And I'll be asking her to ask some of those questions on your behalf. So just to some housekeeping issues then, we would ask that you keep your questions on topic. We are, of course, talking about solving the climate crisis together. So it's the collaboration that we really, really need to focus our attention on and think about here. So with that in mind, we'd ask you would be respectful to other people's views. The university is committed to providing an environment where ideas and views are expressed and where controversial views, which are also valid, they can be put forward, listened to, and of course challenged. Now, this is a healthy discussion, and we would also ask you politely to make sure that your mobile phone is switched off or definitely put on silent, because we can't afford to have any interruptions. And if I could ask that you don't film the event, I should point out that we actually are recording. You see the various cameras dotted around. We're recording the session, so you won't miss out, and it will be made available to the conference delegates and Warwick University staff and students, so you will have the opportunity to watch it all over again if you think you missed something. So you can join that debate online or ask the panellists a question via Twitter. The handle is at Warwick Econ, and you can also use the hashtag climate crisis. Climate crisis is that hashtag. So after this session, you're going to be invited to join us for a drinks reception. Well, you'll have an opportunity then to ask anybody here anything you might have missed, continue that conversation effectively, as inevitably there's always something you might think of, oh, I should have asked them that. Well, you will have the opportunity to do that. So without further ado, let's introduce our panellists this evening. I'll start off with Molly Scott-Cato. Good evening to you. She's a Professor of Green Economics and speaks for the Green Party of England and Wales on economy and finance. She has expertise on climate finance and climate reparations, and for 6 years until 2020, Molly was a member of the European Parliament, so served on its Economics and Monetary Policy Committee, and was also a co-legislator on regulations relating to mandatory disclosure and climate benchmarks. She's also an expert on resilient local economies, social enterprises, I should say, sustainable finance, monetary policy, and tax policy. So you wear lots of hats this evening, and we welcome you to this discussion. To your left there is Claire Nuvian. She is a writer and environmentalist who has dedicated her career to protecting the distant and vulnerable deep sea. In 2018, she won the Goldman Prize, which is a bit like the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for Ecology. Now, Claire is committed to putting an end to deep sea bottom trawling and supports the protection of the vulnerable ocean's depths, putting the case indeed before governments and various institutions. And back in 2004, she founded the Paris and Hong Kong-based non-profit conservation organisation Bloom. So good evening to you, Claire.
Good evening.
And to your side there is Dr. Gail Bradbook. She's an environmental activist and a co-founder of the environmental social movement Extinction Rebellion. She has a PhD in molecular biophysics from the University of Manchester. Her activism focuses on raising awareness and encouraging mass pressure to counter climate change. Now, her talk on the science of the ecological crisis, the psychology of active participation, and we just stop there. And the need for civil disobedience has indeed gone viral, and it has inspired many others to join Extinction Rebellion. So good evening to you, Gam. And last but not least is Jo Salter. She's the founder of a social enterprise, Where Does It Come From?, which aims to promote eco-friendly fair trade and natural clothing. And the brand has been featured in major press and magazines and won several awards. And in 2020, it was listed on Social Enterprise UK's Roll of Honour, and Jo was included in WISE 100, which I'm informed means Women in Social Enterprise, and that was by the Pioneers Post NatWest. Now, Jo is passionate about working with businesses and organisations to change the way we source clothing and textiles to reduce our carbon footprint. So we've got an array of talent just sitting right here in this room, and we will start off by asking each panelist really just to lay out their stall and ask them to explain their approach when it comes to the climate emergency, and indeed if that can be achieved collaboratively. So I would like to come to you, Claire, if I could, who are environmentalist. You know, set out your stall if you wouldn't mind. How do you think we can do this?
I think if you take such a global approach, you may feel a bit daunted. So I just take a sort of domain approach. And I think just talking about the ocean will suffice. I mean, it's enough on our plate. I think our priorities have changed. You know, we spent 7 years just closing the possibility that the European Union had given to boats to fin sharks. You know, there was shark finning going on. And that took 7 years to close a loophole in a regulation that allowed Spanish and Portuguese ships to actually fin millions of sharks every year. And then it took us 7 years to ban deep sea bottom trawling in Europe. The bulk of it was actually going on off the west, the west and the north of Scotland. So UK and international waters were trawled every day to 2,000 meters of depth, which is crazy because you have beautiful, you know, millenary corals and very fragile animals. And ensuring that we banned this took 7 years of constant work in the EU, right? While we were doing this and succeeding, thank God we succeeded, you know, so that at least, you know, gives us a bit of, you know, bright sort of morale altogether. But when you're focusing on one specific regulation, the industry, the fishing industry, was, you know, putting forward other amendments, other regulations, which were devastating the European waters and beyond. And typically they were inventing electric fishing. So they electrocuted, like the Dutch invented electrocution in the waters, which is a huge problem for UK fisheries right now as well, right? So it took us 2 years to get that banned. So we just, you know, we felt for all these years, we were running after the balls that the industry were kicking first. And we thought, that's our approach to priorities now. We are not going to run after their balls, you know. I mean, they're leading the game, and we're in a defensive position. We shouldn't be doing this. We should be in an offensive position to change structurally the problems we have. So we've changed from, you know, just having great success stories and victories, feel-good moments, yes, but at a very high cost, personal cost, and, you know, and at the end of the day, you feel like you've won battles, but you're losing the war. So right now, our priority, absolute priority, is to change the causes of the destruction. And the causes are economic reasons. At the end of the day, what do we have in Europe? We have a financial system that supports, through public subsidies, the destruction of the ocean. I know it sounds simplistic, but it really isn't any more complicated than the way I'm phrasing it. We have a huge, so it's called it's a financial instrument, EMFF, European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, and that gives billions of euros to industrial ships to go out there with extremely destructive fishing gears, which are not selective, which pose huge threats to biodiversity, because you said climate crisis, but I would be more comfortable if we could talk about the ecological crisis, because at the same time as you have a problem with the climate trajectory, you also have biodiversity, which is collapsing. So the combination of both is disastrous. So I think talking about the ecological crisis altogether, I think is more adapted to our situation. And so that's what we have. We have a system which is completely absurd, completely non-productive and actually counterproductive, because you're giving the financial incentives for the destruction of not just biodiversity, not just ecosystems, but actually even climate storage. I mean, free carbon storage for you. And so we've got these trawlers that every day trawl through, including protected areas, but through the world's oceans. And so we think that's our priority. That's a top priority, to change that. If we change the system, which is completely sick, the financial system, we're onto a seriously positive impact. And I would have hope for humanity if we're able to do this. It's going to take a long time. We're going to need a lot of support, including a lot of money. It has to, start raining from the sky, I think. Money has to pour from wherever, citizens, funders, foundations, all of it, because it's a big program, but that's what we should aim for, structural changes.
So structural changes, and we also heard your frustration, and I saw you nodding to a lot of that as well, Gail. I mean, what are your priorities? You're an activist. I sense the frustration that we heard from Claire there, but she didn't just say it was a climate crisis, it's an ecological crisis. How would you address this?
Thanks, it's a great segue. So the question, Extinction Rebellion is far from perfect, and with humility, what's unique about us is that we've been willing to fully face what this crisis is and to feel the deep grief and despair that leads to. And then we set out to tell the truth using the specific methods of non-violent civil disobedience. And rebels in the UK are willing to risk much to speak this truth and have it be heard. Though this sacrifice is not comparable to those made by our family in resistance in the global south, of which over 200 people die annually trying to protect their land from the ravages of this chosen global economic system at the heart of the problems that we face. So we want to collaborate with any economists and their professional bodies who are willing to tell the truth about the problems baked into our economic system, even and especially if it means moments of career-limiting actions when you speak out. I'm a trained physical scientist, but I've also spent years studying economics, encouraged by so-called heterodox economists like our dear professors Molly Scott-Cato, Ha-Joon Chang and Steve Keen, who've encouraged ordinary people to understand that economics is a political discipline and not largely a form of science. So the data is clear. You cannot have continued economic growth on a finite planet because the destruction of the biosphere is coupled to GDP. And only partial decoupling is ever evidenced. We have to stop this monster of infinite growth. And there is, according to scientists, a widespread view that warming of our planet by 4 degrees will result in the collapse of our civilizations. And yet we have an economist, William Nordhaus, who was given the so-called Nobel Prize in economics for saying that 4 degrees of warming is optimal. We have a major issue in our economics, folks. The economic modelling underpinning this work is based on integrated assessment models using estimates of damage functions and future discounting. But natural scientists estimate these damage functions as being 20 to 30 times higher than those from economists. And there's this huge gulf in understanding of climate tipping points and representations of climate catastrophes. The Royal Economic Society had Professor Nicholas Stern saying that economists had also misunderstood the basics of discounting and thereby were undervaluing the lives of young people and future generations. So, folks, we've got this clash between physical and ecological sciences and the free market fundamentalism, the economic growth fetishism of a specific branch of economics that's captured our system because it's in service to the rich and powerful. What is considered economically and politically unrealistic, such as calling for degrowth, is completely different to what is scientifically necessary. The life support systems of our home planet are breaking down and reaching tipping points of no return, and it's physics and ecology in Gaia that will have the last say. So Professor Steve Keen, who's thoroughly debunked this appallingly bad neoclassical economics of climate change, has said, given the impact that economists have had on public policy towards climate change and the immediacy of the threat we now face from climate change, this work could soon be exposed as the most significant and dangerous hoax in the history of science. So when activists like myself question the economic system, we get labelled, it happened yesterday to a colleague, as anti-capitalist. I just think that's a trope for naive, anti-business, anti-markets, anti-progress and uninformed. The labels used to divide and discredit at a time when we need to listen to each other, to apply imagination and determination together to make change. We need a grown-up conversation about economics. Nobody wants to throw out any babies with the bathwater, right? So I'm here to lean in and imploring those of you with powerful voices here, and including and especially the Royal Economic Society, to speak out. We're one family, and we're called in these times to speak truthfully and work together in collaboration to enable the vast and rapid changes that are so desperately needed. Thank you.
Wonderful, Gail. Thank you. If we can now turn to you, Jo, because you're an entrepreneur, but you probably have your own priorities as well. So perhaps you would outline some of those for us as well.
Definitely. Thank you. That was so stirring, actually. I feel quite stirred by what Gail's been talking about. And it is, I'm coming at it from a completely different place, actually. So I set up Where Does It Come From, which is a social enterprise, back in 2013. And it's our strapline is kind clothes that tell tales, and the idea is that basically we can make things kindly, but it's important that we share the stories behind the things that we do. Now, I'm not a person with a fashion background or anything like that, a manufacturing background. I worked for BT for 15 years before setting up a social enterprise, but I just thought, you know, this isn't really good enough. The way that we do business is not good enough. It's not working. You know, we need to do things that work well for the people who make the clothes, that work well for our planet, and we need to share the stories and not hide from the details of the things that we're being forced to buy, I guess. So we're about sharing those stories. Everything that we create comes with a code on the label to share the whole story behind it. And the reason for doing that is so that people can connect a little bit better with the things that they're buying or understand the impacts on the planet and on the people of the things that we're buying. So I chose to do work with textiles, as I say, not because I'm coming from any kind of fashion background, but because food was being pretty well covered. And at that point, no one was really talking about the clothing that we're wearing. It was now ethical fashion is something in the news. It just wasn't then. So the business model that we work to is we're a registered social enterprise, which means that we're a non-profit. And we have three main pillars behind what we do. We work for the environment, which means that the processes and the materials that we use are as kind to the planet as they can be. So that's things like basically being plastic free, working with regenerative, organic fibres, natural fibres, using local production, using hand or renewable energy powered processes and non-toxic dyes and low water. And more recently we've been looking into circular systems as well. So in the pandemic, a whole load of T-shirts have been created for events that never happened. So one of them had Free Britney on. We got a whole load of T-shirts that say Free Britney, and they spelled the name Brittany wrong. They spelled it like they're part of northern France. So we bought a whole heap of those.
They might need reading soon.
Maybe we should. I've got another conversation. Yeah. So what we did was we worked with a social enterprise in the UK, redesigned a graphic, and those T-shirts are now being used by a company for marketing. So looking at those kind of things, clearing away from waste. The people side is really important too. I don't think you can have you can separate people and planet. It's really, really important. So we try to create livelihoods for people all over the world, doing the things that they traditional skills, but also helping give them dignified livelihoods where they want to live as well. It's not just people moving into cities, but rural communities, marginalised people, really important. And talking of collaboration, collaborating with our partners, we would call them, they're all social enterprises and cooperatives. We work together with them. We don't tell them this is the price it's going to be. We don't tell them this is what we're going to do. We work together and we bring them in as very much as part of the team to benefit everyone. And if somebody says to us, I'm sorry that we can't do it for that price, then that's something we discuss with the customer and with the supplier to make sure we can work together. Transparency is absolutely key to what we do, and I think all of us on here believe that more people need to know what is actually going on and not have the information hidden from us. And it might seem that fashion and clothing is maybe a little bit, I don't know, of a frippery somehow, but it's something that we all are wearing clothes, right? We're all wearing clothes here. So it's quite important that we then can know that the clothes that we're wearing have had an impact on our planet, on other people in the world, and on ourselves too. Because I think that knowing the stories behind what you're wearing and what you're choosing to buy affect how you think about them, how you care about them, how you love them, how you dispose of them at the end of life. And ultimately, when you go to buy more things, they affect your choices and whether you buy them or not, and hopefully, in a lot of cases, not. So in the last few years, I set up in 2013, moved from a retail brand to working a lot more with businesses, as Dani said. And that is because I think that there's a lot of people making clothes. We've got enough clothes on this planet already in the fashion shops. So we're working with businesses because businesses have budgets for their marketing, for their merchandise, for their staff uniforms, and we're trying to get hold of some of those budgets. And at the same time, use textiles as a platform for change within those businesses so they can be asking the questions that they need to be asking about what they're doing. And if it's changing your staff uniforms to not be polyester and to be organic cotton, then that's a good way to start as far as I can see. So as I say, collaboration, absolutely vital in the way that we do business with our suppliers and our customers, but also other purpose-led organisations, because we're a fairly small organisation, but there are lots of small organisations out there that are like us, and we work with them on campaigns, we work with them to share the message. There's a lot of networking groups and organisations like Social Enterprise UK, like Fair Trade organisations as well, and Supply Change. And we want to work together and collaborate in spreading the message to people that basically we can do business in a way that can make positive change.
Wonderful. Well, interesting, because Jo, you mentioned how the economy is tied up to what you're pitching there, and we heard that from Gail, which leads us nicely into you, Molly, because you wear two hats. So you're a politician, but you're an economist as well. So perhaps you'll talk to us a little bit more.
Yeah, so I'm here primarily as a Green politician, and I see my unique role as having the climate crisis central to my political aims and really sharing the sense of urgency that Gail was talking about, but using democratic means to gain power to really make change. And I was actually able to do that as an MEP, and I haven't got over the frustration of being kicked out of Brussels yet. I couldn't tell you that for nothing. So you can see examples of this type of political collaboration and green politics in action in countries that have proper democracies, where the way people vote is translated fairly into seats. And a good example, my favourite example, is Germany, where Greens are in government now. So there's something very exciting happening there. Actually, in the finance ministry, so in the economics ministry, in the equivalent of our treasury, Robert Habeck, one of the German Green co-leaders, has set up a sort of super ministry, and he's pulled in all sorts of really great people from across the world, actually, and they're going to focus on the energy transition that needs to happen. And the reason I find that really exciting is, firstly, as we all know, Germans are very efficient, and they also have large industry and energy-intensive industry. So what they have to do is basically what we all have to do. And so I'm watching with great interest to see what's happening there. It's a hugely ambitious programme, and it's obviously been really accelerated by the war in Ukraine and the need to get away from Russian gas. Let's compare that with what's happened in this country with the so-called energy strategy that was released last week, which in my view is a total political failure. There's nothing for people struggling with their fuel bills, because they don't vote Conservative, basically. There's no wind farms because Tory backbenchers find them unsightly. And there's this sort of fake 120 million to go to 8 nuclear power stations when that's more likely to cost something like 200 billion if you base that on Hinkley. So it's just a sort of fake solution, and there's actually a big hole right at the heart of that energy strategy, which means no electricity, even though we know that climate change requires us to move towards electrification. So I identify that as an utter political failure, and I'm afraid we are failing politically on addressing the climate crisis in this country. I'm also an economist, as you said, so I want to find ways to use money to address the climate crisis. Now, we hear lots about voluntary divestment, choosing to move our money away from fossil fuels. But as you said, when I was an MEP, I worked on the world's first mandatory disclosure regime. That means finance companies now have to tell you what they're doing with your money. Now, the amazing thing to me was when I started working on that, about half the finance companies thought it was absolutely fine, that you didn't have any idea what your money was doing, that it was just a total black box, that they might have been investing your money in, cutting down rainforest and putting a palm oil plantation there. You didn't have a right to know. Anyway, over the sort of 2 years we were working on that, that's completely changed. So now you have an absolute right to know what your money's doing. I mean, it doesn't feel like a big achievement to me. It feels like something that should have been the case in the first place. But the mandatory disclosure regime came into operation in April this year. So now companies have to track what they're doing with their investments and what the actual companies they're investing in are doing as well. So that information will help. But it's clearly not enough. We also have to change what money's doing and where it's going. And in my view, the most urgent thing we need to do to address the climate crisis is to starve the fossil fuel industry of further finance. So I've got a number of proposals to do that. The first one is that all banks should produce a climate roadmap, which means that they indicate clearly how they're going to move away and get rid of all their investments in fossil fuels. They should be doing that anyway for kind of fiduciary duty type reasons, but we need to make it a legal requirement. We give them a banking license. It's a license to print money. It should come with strict conditions in terms of climate action. Then the Bank of England should adopt a policy that's called credit guidance, which means effectively you don't just let the market decide where the money goes. You say, well, we need to move rapidly away from fossil fuels, so we favour these types of directions for investment to go. And at the same time, you prohibit or you have bans or ceilings on money going towards unsustainable activities. I think it's really important that we grasp that, we stand behind the banking licence, so we as citizens should have a right to say what happens with that money. Now, a bit of time just on working collaboratively. I would love you to imagine a red-green government. That would be collaborative working. I would be so delighted if that was the case. Okay, we can have like the Germans and have Liberal Democrats as well. We'll have a traffic light government here. That would be what I see as collaborative working. We disagree on policy areas, but that's the whole point. You get together, you appeal for votes, and then you collaborate constructively afterwards. And I have to say, I'm a huge fan of Ed Miliband. I think he was a very good energy secretary, and I think he'd be, I'd let him have that job in the coalition government. I would love to be collaborating more with economists, but just going back to something, again, that Gail said, I've had quite a lot of trouble because most economists very much look down their nose at me because I'm not a real economist, because I'm a green economist, and I don't believe in growth, and I'm quite sceptical about the way the finance system works. And I think we need to see a lot more collaboration between all the economists out there to really address this problem. And if economists aren't looking at the climate crisis and the need to end economic growth, then I do think they're not doing their job properly. I could very much collaborate with Claire because I didn't know she was so involved with European policy making, but I'd be delighted. Perhaps you can get me my job in the Parliament back and then we can collaborate.
I've turn around Brexit on my own?
Yeah,
I can do that.
Yeah, no problem. I've already collaborated a lot with Gail, and I see there's a really important synergy there because, I've actually sat on the pavement myself, but I would happily be inside Parliament, and if there were more Greens in Parliament, I don't think we'd need so many people sitting on the pavement outside. And Joe's work, I very much enjoyed hearing you talk about your work. To me, I think it's important. At the moment, a lot of that is voluntary consumer choice. You're giving people the information, but I very much see the need for international laws, for example, the UN binding treaty, so that the appalling behaviour that we see in terms of some of the textile industry is actually illegal. So it's not down to you when you get to go to the shop. It's actually not possible because it would be banned from international production. So that's my contribution. Look forward to hearing questions and what you've all got to say.
Great, Molly. I mean, that was really interesting, wasn't it? Because from you, we've heard some concrete, financial demands really that could work. But it does feel like we're a long way off from that. And I heard from you first, Claire, and your frustration, the fact it takes so long to get just doing little things. And so with that in mind, how feasible, because I mean, we all know there's a climate emergency, don't we? But how feasible is it for us to change everything? You talked about just being able to concentrate on one thing, because if you think about it all, it'll just drive you crazy. How feasible is it to change every single aspect of our lives, and effectively as well, to keep everybody happy? Because we know there's an emergency, but how do we do that without having to wait 7 years for each individual thing?
Can I give you one example of a policy that I think... So I think you need to see the system, and then you need to conceive of policies that will operate right across the system. So I'm a huge fan of the carbon tax for this reason, because if you introduce the carbon tax upstream, it would put a price on the production of CO2 in every single company and activity across the economy. So it would increase prices, and it would be necessary to use the revenue to then support people who were paying higher prices. But to my mind, it's a very good example within a market system of a policy that then works, it filters down and it works right across the economy. So I think you need to have a systemic understanding, but then you need to introduce concrete overarching policies that create the right incentives to make the changes. That's what I'm looking for when I'm looking for an effective policy.
Gail, do you want to reply to that?
Well, I think you have to look for levers in the system, because I don't think we have a functioning democracy, so you're not getting leadership on this issue and people aren't speaking out, which is why it's really contingent on everybody in every place that they can to be really truthful. When we talk about what's feasible, we have to bear in mind that we're talking about the collapse of civilization. We're talking about people not having enough food to eat. We're talking about people's major cities across the world being flooded. It's quite hard to get your head around the apocalyptic nature of what we're facing. And when you don't have leaders speaking the truth within a system that's just sort of self-perpetuating, we've got really big problems. So it does make a difference when people commit sort of acts of civil disobedience. And our XR social scientists launched recently, and they said, what should we do? And I said, sorry, but I said, go and occupy your economics department. Because and it's not nothing personal to any of the economists here. I don't know anything about your own personal work. But there's not a strong enough message from the world of economics about the problems. Like Molly being called a heterodox economist, right? If your economics is not about the environment, it's nonsense, right? So, that's what I think. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, do you want to pick up on that? Do you think every decision that we make should be based on the climate? It needs to go back to the climate. What's this doing?
It will. I mean, at the end of the day, it will, because it's catching up with us. But I don't think it's part of our human capacity to really believe in things until they really hit us. I mean, there's no real example of being extremely smart, right, as a group. So we can, but we have to put a lot of pressure on the system. So, and that's why I think there is no magical recipe. I mean, we've managed to, it sounded like small things, by the way. You said small things in Europe, but they were not small things. I mean, it was very difficult. We had 28 member countries, because, of course, since you've left, and it's really a disaster, but, we had 28 countries against us. And the European Commission and, the Council, we had the Council, the Parliament, for the deep sea bottom trawl ban, for example, the vote in 2013, we lost the vote. We lost it to lies and the industrial lobbies lobbying the Parliament with fake news, real fake news. In those days, we're not talking about that in those terms, but that's exactly what they were doing. So, it's really quite daunting, but that's why I think if we at least address the right level of decision-making with the right structural decisions to be made, then everyone takes, his own part, but through the system, with the perseverance, if we manage to actually get decisions on whatever your domain is, if we manage to get decisions on each domain through to a successful vote, through successful legislation, would be okay. So, and it won't happen just by talking, or I think it's very important to change mental perceptions of what's going on. So we need very strong movements like Extinction Rebellion with such freshening and fresh air for people. But you do need to follow through in the current systems, because yes, we need a change of the system, but it's not happening, right? So we still need to work with the systems until we just put persevering pressure on them until we get this, like, true decisions in the real world. And if we manage to get them in 5-7 years, that's already going to be a miracle. I mean, you have to realize, I know the IPCC is telling us we've got 3 years to stick to 1.5 degrees, but we will not stick to 1.5 degrees, and we know we will not, right? We're heading for a 2.7 degree scenario. So it's dramatic. The disaster will catch up with us. But the more it's degrading, maybe the more there is mental space opening in people's minds, in legislators' minds, you know. For sure, impatience is building up. But the truth is, the political systems are not changing right now. So we have to work with them, you know.
Jo, you're working with the systems to some degree with what you're doing as well. I mean, give us examples how that's working for you, and perhaps any tips to how that might be opened up to other areas.
Well, I agree very much with what Molly was saying actually about legislation, because we very much come from a place where I thought, maybe naively, you know, we'll share this information with people. People will understand that once they realise that there's farmers committing suicide in India because of the prices of cotton, you know, and what's happening to our planet, and dyes being washed into the sea, then they'll want to change. But people don't necessarily, they don't get the information, or they don't completely understand. At the moment, we have a business environment in fashion particularly, which I know about, where companies are rewarded for making more and more and more stuff, and making it as cheaply as possible, as damaging as possible to the environment. You know, that it's only about the cost, it's not about anything else. And that's what really needs to change. It hugely needs to change. So I do think we need to collaborate to get those messages out there so that people do understand what's happening. We need to make the business model be far less based on mass consumption and mass production, but on rewarding businesses for making the changes that they need to make, in the materials that they're using, in the way that products are circular and end of life, and all of that kind of thing. And we need to have laws to make sure that that happens. And there's another key thing as well, which is around price. At the moment, we have perceptions about how much things should cost, and that was alluded to in terms of energy and things as well. But clothing, going into a shop and buying a T-shirt for £5, people don't seem to understand all the different steps that have to be gone through for a T-shirt. So if it's a cotton T-shirt, which we hope it would be, or even hemp or something like that, then that has to be farmed. So someone has to be paid for farming it. There's the costs of that. There's the costs of knitting, sewing, weaving, turning that into a garment, the design, all of those different steps. I won't list everything off because we'll be here all day. And then freighting that across the world. You can't do it for a £5. You really can't.
Really interesting. We're going to pause for a minute because I really just want to bring in our virtual audience and indeed our audience who are with us here tonight. And I'd like to take questions from the audience first, our in-person audience. And I'm going to be asking, I think my first question is going to come over there. There we are, we have a hand. And can I just get your name? There we go, we've got a microphone as well. Can I get your name?
Absolutely. Good evening. My name is Eric.
Eric, can you just give us your question, please?
Absolutely. Is political collaboration feasible when it comes to solving the climate crisis? This would be directed to Professor Cato.
Well, it's not only feasible, it's absolutely essential, I believe. I mean, we were talking before we came out here about broken constitutions. I think the problem with the UK constitution is that it's designed on government and opposition. It's designed to create conflict rather than collaboration. So why have we, you know, so we had the Labour government, they brought in the Climate Change Act, it had a lot of useful proposals, they had a fuel duty accelerator, but as soon as the Conservatives get in, they're, you know, much more in hock to the fossil fuel lobby, so the climate change targets are reduced and they're missed, and, you know, we've had fuel duty cut, which I find quite unbelievable, honestly, in the middle of a climate crisis. So, you know, so the constitution is broken, and that's what makes it so difficult for us to collaborate. Whereas, you know, my beloved Germany that I've already spoken about, you know, it has a very good constitution. So not only can, not only do you need collaboration in order to organise a government, because you have a multi-party system, you also, it enables people to choose a new party. So if none of the parties are doing enough on the climate, they can choose a new party. Now, you don't have to look as far as Germany to see that happening, because actually it also happened in Scotland. When a proportional system was introduced in Scotland, unsurprisingly to me, the Greens got a much higher share of the vote, so they are now governing Scotland together with the Scottish nationalists. They've got, you know, really exciting policies like free bus travel for under 21s, a really important home insulation programme, all the kinds of things that we could see the UK government doing if we had, only if we had a government that actually represent how people want to vote. If you look at the polling, we would indeed have that sort of government in the UK, but our completely absurd 18th century electoral system. I'm thinking you might not originate from this country, am I right?
Correct, I'm from Austria, so the Greens are governing there as well with the Conservatives.
Okay, yeah. No, the Greens are in government in lots of different countries with different people, but every time we make the same demands to go into government, and every time it results in, you know, more investment in public transport, more home insulation, really serious action on climate. Same in Ireland, actually. So, yeah, I mean, to go back to your original question, I just think collaborative government is a better form of government. I mean, you very much see this at the European level as well, because again, multi-party system, I couldn't get anything agreed in the Parliament, I couldn't get anything passed until I could build a majority. So you have to bring everybody on board. And once you've done that, everybody's bought into the solution. Whereas in this country, it's like a seesaw, you know, backwards and forwards, you just don't progress at all. So I'm with you. I don't think you're surprised to hear that, but yeah, collaboration is essential if we're going to address the climate crisis.
Okay, lovely. I think we've got one over here as well. But if we can get the microphone over here.
Hello, Jo. It's Sarah. What more can small businesses do in collaboration with their local communities and customers to reduce our carbon footprint?
Well, a lot. And it's great. I mean, the way that small businesses, we're a small business, part of all the organisations about that, working within your community to create platforms, I suppose, for change is a really key thing. So I think small businesses do tend to reach out locally, maybe more than larger businesses do anyway, so you have that relationship with your people, that your customers. But it means that you can spread your message, you can campaign more, you can get your thinking across a lot better. But also, I think maybe local businesses don't compete on the same level as well. We tend to work together to get things across rather than trying to do each other out of business. We're trying to share the same messages together.
Okay. Yes, can we get a microphone over here? Is that all right? And then we're going to our virtual audience after this one. Can I get your name first of all, please?
Thank you. It's Toby Gale. My question is simply, how can economics change from being part of the problem to being part of the solution?
Okay.
Well,
Molly?
I think the most important thing is that nobody gets through an economics degree without addressing some of these issues. So you won't be surprised to hear I've got a book on this topic, which is called Environment and Economy. So it's not all what I think, it's what a range of different schools of economics have thought when addressing the environmental crisis. And I think that every economics student should have to study a course on that sort of topic, because it just feels to me irresponsible. I feel the same about students in general. You know, the students leaving our university are facing a climate change world, a world of volatility, instability, constant change. Are we preparing them for that world as citizens, never mind as economists? So I think that the teaching side is really important, but I think also the research side is very important. And yeah, I mean, as Gail said, you know, I think economists should all, whatever the type of economics they're doing, they should really think, am I addressing the main crises facing the world? That's it's a task for economists. So after the crash, the Queen very famously went to the London School of Economics and said, how come you didn't see this coming? You know, surely we should be asking economists the same about the climate crisis, and they should be asking themselves. And if they don't have an answer to that question, maybe they should change what they're doing.
Claire, I think you want to say something there.
Yeah, I mean, this is my moment. I want to pledge because I think we've got a huge issue. The climate solution will come at least half from the ocean, and nobody's talking about this. I mean, it's nowhere in the news. Fisheries economists are just a few worldwide. Economics departments don't work on fisheries. They don't work on the destruction of the natural assets of the ocean. And the IPBES scientists have said that the first cause of destruction of the ocean is industrial fisheries. And nobody works on them. I mean, just a few people here and there. You know, the biggest sector is probably the University of British Columbia Fisheries Economics Department. But they can't make up for the fact that the other departments of economics worldwide are not looking at the problem. And I know, for example, in France, we had an issue with the French part of the European subsidies given out to the sector. So nobody was working on that topic because the data were not available. So we've been suing the French government for 7 years, and we still haven't had the full data because there's so much retention, right? They are retaining the data because this is the most critical area that you can look at. And if you look at what the spendings, public spendings to the destructive fisheries, then you understand where the solution is. It's in turning that financial tap. And nobody's working on this. So my big pledge is that please, you know, now that the data are available, we have a database with all the public fisheries subsidies now. We can invite economists. We're not economists. We can invite, and we are doing this in France, and we are really seriously inviting economists to look at the data with us, because we need to look at from every single angle possible. We need to put it out there. The ocean, we will not be able to solve the climate and biodiversity crisis without looking at the ocean, and nobody is. So please, please do. And if the minute you're going to have economists worldwide talk about this, from lots of different, you know, calculating externalities when you're destroyed the biodiversity, carbon storage, all of that, then you're going to see it's going to be in the news. And then legislators are going to be thinking, we've had a bit of a blind spot recently. Maybe we should start paying more attention and making more sense of our economies.
And I guess that also ties in with that idea of transparency, which we started off by talking about. Gail, you were doing something, you were nodding there.
What I like to say in response to that question is that there are sort of moments when people say the emperor's got no clothes on. And when it comes to economics, we need bodies like the Royal Economic Society to play that role now. And I would like the Royal Economic Society to declare the fact, and economics departments to declare the fact that the current political economy is destroying life on Earth. I would like them to say that we can change our economy with wisdom and imagination in a way that will regenerate the natural world. And specifically, I think we need people to speak out against this Nobel Prize for this awful work, because it's not some stupid thing that happened on the side. These integrated assessment models are being used by the Bank of England to talk about how we should finance. It's nonsense, folks. You just scratch the surface. A physical scientist, Professor Kevin Anderson, said of economists, he said he prefers to call them astrologists, and he says it's okay for them to be using page numbers, they shouldn't be using any other numbers. I mean, like, that's really, really bad, isn't it? If your profession is being talked about that by climate scientists, and so point out that the emperor's got no clothes on. Another piece is the journals, right? The journals, look at what's in it. There's barely anything in the economics journals about climate and ecological change. So we need to change from things like cost-benefit analysis on whether life on Earth survives, right? We're close to a Permian mass extinction event, folks. We're talking cost, but it's nonsense. Risk, opportunity analysis make more sense. And then how are we going to finance this? Again, you know, modern monetary theory should come to the heart of modern economics. So nobody should be called a heterodox economist. You should be heterodox if you're not a green economist, you know. Everybody else is heterodox, because what are you talking about? And I think that that moment of speaking the truth and calling and naming things we're not talking about blaming and shaming. We're talking about kindness here, right? But I'm making specific requests to the Royal Economic Society. These institutions are quite conservative, and we haven't got time for that now. We need people to be really powerful.
Well, that might be one to take offline after this. Let's, though, turn our attention to our virtual audience who have been standing by very patiently. We've already ate into some of that time, but if I could just turn to you, Caroline, because you're in touch with people who are getting in touch that way, aren't you? So perhaps you give us a question.
Okay, thank you, Dani. So the online discussion has livened up in the last few minutes. So we've got a question here from Alanya, who says, I like fashion and clothing. The question is, what will be my incentive to purchase more expensive clothes produced through a more environmentally friendly process instead of buying from Primark, for example, when energy prices and taxes are going up and my gross salary is fixed?
I mean, that's the problem, isn't it, Joe? Everybody's got less in their pocket now. It's just an easy fix, but it's not doing anything for our planet.
No, but I think it's okay to love clothes, it's okay to love fashion, but we need to rethink the way that we're buying our clothing. I mean, you can still buy secondhand, you can still buy, you can upcycle and do things like that. But I think that the key message I have to say is that we just got to buy a whole lot less, a whole lot less, you know. We need to be buying much better quality than we're buying and keeping it, swapping it with our friends, all of those kind of things. There's just no reason, I don't know if it's because I'm middle-aged or whatever, that you need to be going out every Saturday and buying bags and bags full of Primark of clothing. I mean, I walk down the street and I bump into my friends, they're hiding their Primark bags behind their back. And I think, why do you feel the need to do this? I don't necessarily get it. But seriously, there are loads of ways that you can love clothing, and you can add a lot more of your own individual style that way too, rather than wearing the same kinds of things as everyone else. So that's what I would say. But yeah, that's basically my answer. Buy less.
Great. Walk of shame has taken on another meaning. And can we go to you, Caroline, for another one, if that's all right?
Of course. So we've got two questions online that I'm going to connect to each other here. First of all, somebody's asked, can we incentivise collaboration to combat climate change? And then we've got a related question on to what extent international collaboration is working and to what extent we can engender that.
Well, there's lots of ideas there. I actually want to go to the last question first, because we haven't really talked about that international aspect of it, and that really is part of this.
Daunting.
And daunting, yeah. I mean, gosh, I mean, that is a problem, isn't it? How do we get the international community to get on board, well, with what we're perhaps not doing is Germany, as Molly says. Germany seems to be doing it right at the moment, but how do we all sing from the same hymn sheet and get together and work out a proper plan?
To be honest, you have to be very patient. It's just a matter of patience, but I don't think international governance is in its best days right now, right? I mean, the WTO has not produced anything useful in so many years. They've been talking about, cutting harmful fishery subsidies for more than 20 years, and it still hasn't happened. So, you better be very patient if you're going to be working with international governance. But it does progress somehow. You can't say that the UN treaties are useless, not at all. At least they're always behind, always lagging behind the industrial practices and acts. So it's if you're not sovereign in your decision making, what can you do? I mean, you cannot force China to embrace your standards. You cannot. We're working in the Indian Ocean, starting because we have built a database on fishery subsidies, all fishery subsidies. I'm really trying to seduce economists here. We're the only ones who have it worldwide. Come talk to me afterwards. But also we built a fishing agreements database, which has all the fishing agreements that the EU has passed with other countries to access their waters. So Seychelles, Kenya, Madagascar, and you name it. Since 1979, each one of them, we have them, right? And so we know what to do. We know where to go. We know how to work in those Indian Ocean zones, for example. But there are Chinese vessels, so we know how to impact European fleets. What do we do with the Chinese vessels? What do we do with the Russian vessels, typically, right? This is just a core example, real world. The best thing we can do is up our standards, up our transparency standards. Tell what the union is doing, and the UK, we work with a lot of UK fishermen as well. We need to be very clean. And right now, the US foundations, for example, I heard, are actually looking at European NGOs like ours, because they think we're at the right space to make change and show the world that we can actually lead in terms of environmental standards. So that's what we can do. We can show the world, we can show Madagascar that they're going to gain a lot more if they stop killing their own livelihoods by granting fishing agreements to Chinese fleets which come and trawl the hell out of their potential of marine ecosystems and food for their own country. So I think, in your own sovereign spot, try to be the best. And that at some point will probably change the narrative, the standards, the model that we provide for the rest of the world. I mean, we have an office in China, right? I mean, in Hong Kong, which has become really problematic. I mean, so my colleagues in Hong Kong, we fought shark finning, shark fin consumption for so many years. Right now, you don't have the space for freedom. You cannot speak. They can't speak the truth. It's become such a difficult spot. What can you do? Do you leave the country? Or do you stay in and work with those statistics that they give you access to, and it's narrowing down? You're not going to change that from one day to the next. I mean, the part of the world is really becoming much darker these days, as you know. So it's on our shoulders to be seriously good. And therefore, we need everyone to put pressure on the system, because we will not win just if you address politics. If you talk to politicians and there's no public opinion going your own with your route and going, you're pledging the same story. Sorry, let's say, if you're not putting pressure on retailers to have procurement policies that make sense, then legislators are not going to listen. But if you have all of that happening at the same time, and the media are following, the public opinion, the retailers, the private practices, all of that, then legislators do change, and they will enact what
again,
we need to do, new standards.
It's getting all those lines and ducks in a row, isn't it? And having that joined up thinking. Molly, would you like to unpick some of those thoughts? There's plenty to get through there.
It's a huge question, and I think it's just the right time to be asking this question, because we've hoped for the best with a lot of countries. For example, we've said, oh, well, China's becoming a huge economy, democracy will follow, and we've hoped that somehow, allowing Russians into London would encourage them to be more democratic, or perhaps we just wanted their cash. But, these sort of ways in which we've engaged in wistful thinking, they're finished now. They're really finished now. We've got the appalling, just barbaric activities of Russia in Ukraine being backed up by China. Why are we still buying Chinese stuff? I bet this glass was made in China. Why are we still doing that? I mean, sorry, but an end to all of that. I worked a lot with the Tibetan people when I was an MEP. It was quite clear what sort of regime China was from the way they treated Tibet. Why do we just allow all their stuff to flow in and out? So I'm sorry, I'm not being very collaborative now, am I? But honestly, I think you collaborate with people who share your principles and values. You set a standard with those people, but then you have to exclude people who are not rising to that level. And I think globalization was kind of something we all wanted to believe in. Certainly the economics profession believed in that very strongly. And so, oh, well, it'll float all boats, everybody will benefit, consumers will get cheap prices, so we won't worry too much about, what's happening with the producers. We have to move beyond that. We have to think about that in a different way, because that process is not only killing the planet, it's also killing democracy. And so, now is the time to change. And I think I totally agree with what you said. I think the EU has really led here in terms of global standards. Of course, I spent my whole time there being frustrated we weren't going far enough and fast enough on environmental and climate issues. But still, the EU is world leading. And just as one small example, using trade policy, we can set a standard for climate, but if you do that, you're increasing higher prices into your production, and then you're basically just offshoring jobs, because they'll make things cheaper in China with low human rights standards, low climate standards, and so on. So the proposal to address that is this carbon border adjustment, which is like quite a new thing that the EU's finally, it's a tariff, isn't it? They don't want to say tariff, but it's a tariff. It's saying, if you don't reach the same climate standard, we're going to tax your goods. Now, here's an interesting thought. The UK is now developing its own carbon border adjustment, because we've taken back control, so we can do this on our own now. But there is, I think, some scope here, not sort of, let's say, constructive competition. We saw that with the plastics policy. I think we can sort of pressure the UK government now to do better than the EU, and hopefully we'll see, it's not really collaboration, but it's a way in which they can have some sort of bidding war or something, so we do improve standards. But the most important thing is that the EU has to stick to its high standards and principles and then require others to rise to that standard. And if they don't, just not engage in trade with them. So to me, I think it's time to be really tough about that.
So we're already seeing problems with that idea of collaboration, aren't we? So it's collaboration with some people, but that's not really collaboration, is it? I mean, Gail, will you unpick some of that as well?
I think it's a really interesting question, even this idea of incentivising things. Pat McCabe, who's an amazing Indigenous teacher and leader, says that humanity has got low self-esteem right now. We think that everything that we touch, we break. And it's not like that. It's because we've signed up to a certain paradigm. We're behaving in a certain way. People, human beings, are meant to be keystone species. We're meant to make the world more beautiful. That's what we've done as peoples in the past. And we're living in a system that makes us behave badly. It's not by accident that people think they need new clothes, right? 650 billion annually spent on advertising dollars, right? I mean, it's a propaganda machine that we allow to happen. People, we have different people in our heads, actually. The neuroscience makes this clear these days. You have the sort of wounded, worried person on your left hemisphere, and the right hemisphere is more visionary and associated with empathy, creativity and playfulness. And there's a way in which we need to get the Western civilization out of our own bodies, the way it's showing up. And actually, what I've discovered is a really strange way to incentivize people is to go and break their window. I'll be in court this month twice for breaking the window of the Department for Transport and the window of Barclays Bank. And what I've experienced, and I heard Greta Thunberg talking about this as well, behind the scenes people come up to you and they thank you for what you're doing. They know that it needs to happen. A head of sustainability of a bank said that the breaking of the windows was making their job easier. The person who was a former vice chairman of a major high street bank said that what we did was correct.
But I think it's
they won't say it publicly.
I think it's fair to say, though, Gail, with all honesty, that may be the case, but there's lots of people that you get the heckles up as well, because they don't think that's the right way to proceed. They understand your principles, that they don't think that's the way you will get people on board.
Well, I mean, you know, this is the theory of civil disobedience, right? Is you're not here to be liked, and you're here to get the conversation to happen. So
I can tell you that sitting in the European Parliament, when Fridays for the Future and Extinction Rebellion started up, the stuff that I was being laughed at for proposing, suddenly everybody was proposing it. I could sit there and notice the power shift. So, yeah, everybody can get irritated about the individual actions, but it has been politically powerful. And, you know, I really congratulate XR for that.
So what do we see as the way forward then? Jo?
I was still thinking about the international question.
Well, we could. Plenty to go on there.
No, I was thinking what Molly was saying about international shipping, basically, international shopping, I suppose. So in fashion and in loads of other industries and the glass on the table, we have the supply chain, so things are coming from all over the world. And until very recently, we didn't know where things were coming from. A company would front that up, and they would front it to someone else, it would go to someone else, and it could be made anywhere in the world and have any kind of impact on people or planet without us even knowing what that was. So we didn't own that, did we? We didn't own in any way the impacts of the things that we were having made. And I suppose transparency, I see, is a huge way of being able to do that. Because if you can start saying to people, did you know that glass was made by Uyghurs in China who were in slave labour? Suddenly you've got that.
It would be interesting, wouldn't it, if we could all start looking at our own products and everything and see how much of it didn't come from China. I mean, seriously, almost, because I've started thinking, right, that's the end of me with Chinese products now, but I just don't know what I'd be able to do.
No, you won't know. And
you won't know, and also you probably just would be naked. You wouldn't even have any clothes at the end of the day.
Possibly. Yeah, I mean, the clothing is a really interesting one for me. That one thing that really annoys me, minding my language a bit, is when people say to me, look at this British T-shirt. This is a fantastic British T-shirt I got. I said, what's it made of? Cotton. We don't grow any cotton in the UK. So all these people who say that they've got these British T-shirts, it's just a nonsense, and we delude ourselves, you know. We've got to start calling it out more.
That's interesting. So it's a false economy, isn't it? We are going to soon be drawing this discussion to a close, but I thought it might be nice to get some one-word answers from our panellists, because
one-word answers, that's always difficult.
So I'm just doing a couple of fire questions, as we call them. Jo, I'm going to come this way, okay? So Jo, if I could start off with you, a yes or no answer here. Can we solve the climate crisis together? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, that's all right. Gail? No. It's a big no from you. And you, Claire?
Can you rephrase with ecological crisis?
Oh, just a very simple, can we solve the climate crisis or ecological crisis together, yes or no?
Of course we can, if we're smart.
Okay, and
I'm
Molly?
a yes too.
Yes, okay, so 3 yeses, 1 no. Okay, next one. If not, what is the one major thing that is preventing that from happening? So, actually, that will be to you, Gail. So,
It's just that it's already here and people are already dying. So to say we can solve something when we're going over 1.5 degrees of warming just feels too painful to me.
Yeah.
It's not really facing the reality that it's happening. We can make things better together.
Okay.
That's what I
But
would
the
say.
answer to your question is lobbyists and corporations.
they're the
That's
people that can put the
answer to
pressure
your-
on.
They're the people that are stopping us from making the change.
exactly.
The citizens of
That's
the world want to live in happiness, want to have a comfortable future, want to be able to have grandchildren. But a tiny number of people who run those corporations and the financial corporations, they are profiting from this system and blocking the changes we
putting the
need to
brakes on.
make.
That is so true. I mean, I have to say, and we're hosting a 26 scientist workshop over many years to produce, we hope, the best possible paper worldwide on fisheries and sustainability. And all of them, I mean, some of them are 75-year-old, the best fishery scientists out there, and they all name the roadblocks to change are lobbies and politicians and their interconnectedness.
So they're putting the roadblocks on, and if that continues, I suppose, and this is a big question, the last one, but I just want a number from you now. So how long will it take us to get there? Joe?
It's got to take us less than 10 years.
Yeah, but how long will it take us? That's a different question.
I'm a positive person by nature. I'm going to have to go with less than 10 years.
Less than 10, Gail.
It's got to.
We could turn this around in a generation, and Paul Hawken's new book, Regeneration, is a brilliant book to read on how that could be done.
Number?
A generation, I don't know. I'm like
25 years.
25 again for 25? Okay. Claire.
I think we're going to have to lose most before we wake up, just like Hong Kong, they banned trawling after there was not one single fish left. I think that's humanity. So I would say 30, 40 years will be smart.
That's quite depressing, Molly.
I don't think we've got that much time, but the time is kind of, time isn't worth the same amount. What we do today is worth 10 times as much as what we do in 30 years' time. So it's not a question of when do we do it, but it's a question of how much can we do today, and let's do a lot more, and then more again tomorrow. So the years aren't really the point. The point is action as fast as we can.
Action as fast as we can. A bit like what we've been saying all along. And many reports, IPCC reports, have been saying action, but action though comes a lot slower though than what people want to do, don't they? And I'd just like to thank all of our panellists because it's been a really interesting discussion. Lots of thoughts that perhaps one day might turn into action. Interesting concept. We all, I think, concur that something needs to be done urgently, and this idea of transparency and how economies also the economic sector also needs to get on board with some of this change as well. Otherwise, we're not going to go anywhere. We have a long way, of course, to go to solve this climate crisis, and potentially by putting our heads together and combining our efforts, we will make the process quicker and more efficient. Now, we can also see that talking and listening to each other, we already had a few ideas that came about there. We can learn a lot and appreciate each other's points of view. And it is only then when we start talking about things that we can start to work together on mitigating some of that climate change and lobbying government, although we hear there we don't want lobbying for specific climate policies which would accelerate the changes that we all know are so very, very necessary. We all have to start putting climate change at the forefront of the decisions we make daily. As Bill Gates has put it, we need to transform the way we do almost everything we want to avoid a climate disaster. And in this, we're all united, so we should find common ground and start supporting each other in achieving a common goal. Each and every one of us can contribute to this goal, whether we're a politician, an entrepreneur like Joe, an economist like Molly, a voter or an individual. We all have a part to play in this transition. I'd like to thank everybody for taking part. Thank you for letting me chair this wonderful discussion. I know there's going to be lots to go on after we finish now, and more questions I'm sure that people will want to ask. But thank you all to the audience for engaging and asking some really interesting questions, the people who are here, but the people who are joining us virtually as well. And thank you very much to the Royal Economic Society for allowing us the opportunity to host this event. Lastly, thank you to the Department of Economics. Thank you especially to Maxine Thacker and Bozena Beauclair, who have worked closely, and they also have worked incredibly hard though to make this whole event a success. So well done, ladies. And if I could now invite all of you who are here physically to join us in Space One, where I believe there will be some refreshments. Thank you very much to everybody, and I'm sure that conversation will continue after we finish now. Thank you.